You ever notice something strange about history? Entire economies collapse. Millions lose jobs. Nations fall into chaos. But when you look closely, it often starts with just a few men making decisions in quiet rooms. No explosions, no warning sirens, just policies, beliefs, and dangerous certainty. And the truth is, this still affects you today. Your savings, your job market, even the price of the food you buy. Because financial systems don't collapse only from greed. Sometimes they collapse because brilliant people refuse to question their own ideas. In this video, we're diving deep into the story behind Lords of Finance by Liaquat Ahamed. You'll discover how four central bankers quietly shaped the global economy, why the gold standard became a financial religion that blinded leaders, how the 1920s boom tricked millions into believing prosperity was permanent, and the psychological mistakes that turned a market crash into the Great Depression. But more importantly, you'll learn the dangerous mindset patterns that still drive economic bubbles today. Because if you understand how systems collapse, you begin to see the warning signs before everyone else does. And that knowledge might change how you see money, power, and stability forever. So stay with me, because the real story of financial collapse is not about numbers. It's about human psychology, power, and the cost of certainty. Chapter 1. The quiet men who controlled the fate of millions. You ever stop and ask yourself something strange? Not about success, not about money, but about who actually decides the fate of entire nations while you sleep? Because history is rarely moved by crowds. Most of the time, it moves because 4 or 5 quiet men sit in a room and make a decision, and the world just bends. At the start of the 20th century, global finance looked calm, almost elegant. Gold flowed between countries like a disciplined river. Currencies stayed fixed. Trade expanded. People believed the system was natural, permanent, civilized. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It wasn't a system. It was a fragile belief held together by a handful of central bankers. Men who believed they understood the invisible machinery of money. Men who believed they could control storms with equations. Liaquat Ahamed wrote about this not as a simple economic story, but as a human one. Because the real story is not about interest rates. It's about ego, conviction, and the dangerous comfort of certainty. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the universe is change, and life is opinion. Finance works the same way. Money is not gold. Money is belief, and belief is fragile. In the early 1900s, four central bankers sat at the center of the global system. They were respected, revered even. Their decisions shaped currencies, trade, employment, and the stability of entire nations. But here's the psychological trap. When a man controls a system long enough, he begins to believe the system cannot exist without him. This might sound harsh, even cynical, but history suggests something darker. The same minds that built stability often become prisoners of their own ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche warned about this in a different context. He said conviction can become a more dangerous enemy of truth than lies. Because lies can be corrected, conviction cannot. And the gold standard, the sacred rule of global finance at the time, was not just an economic tool. It became a doctrine, a belief system, a kind of financial religion. And like most religions, questioning it was treated as weakness. So imagine this. You are one of the most powerful financial minds in the world. You believe stability depends on discipline, on gold, on strict monetary control, and millions of lives depend on your judgment. Now here's the real question. What happens when your belief is wrong? Not slightly wrong, but catastrophically wrong. Because the story of modern finance does not begin with greed. It begins with something more dangerous. Brilliant men who believed they were saving the world. And sometimes, that's exactly how disasters begin. Chapter 2. The illusion of control. Why you trust systems that were never stable. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever believed something was stable just because everyone around you acted like it was? A job, a market, a government, a financial system. You look around. People seem calm. Experts speak confidently. So you assume the structure is solid. But stability in human systems is often just collective agreement. Nothing more. At the beginning of the 1900s, the global financial system rested on a single sacred rule, the gold standard. Simple idea. Every major currency could be converted into gold. Governments promised discipline. Central banks promised restraint. And the world believed this promise. Trade expanded. Capital moved across borders. Markets grew. From the outside, it looked like perfect order. But beneath that order lived a dangerous assumption, that human beings would always behave rationally. Sun Tzu once said that strategy collapses when leaders begin believing their own plans are flawless. Finance works the same way. The gold standard demanded strict obedience. If a country faced economic trouble, central banks had only one acceptable response: raise interest rates, cut spending, defend the value of currency, even if people suffered, even if unemployment rose, even if businesses collapsed, because the system demanded discipline over compassion. This might sound cruel, but it was considered necessary. And here is where psychology enters the room. Economist Irving Fisher discovered something dangerous in markets long before the crash of 1929. He observed that humans develop overconfidence during long periods of stability. Success convinces people the system works perfectly, even when cracks begin forming. Psychologists later described a similar pattern in the work of Daniel Kahneman in 1979. He showed how humans suffer from normalcy bias, the belief that tomorrow will look like yesterday, even when warning signs appear. And the longer stability lasts, the stronger this illusion becomes. Central bankers of the early 20th century believed the gold standard had created the most reliable financial system in history. They believed discipline alone could prevent collapse. But they forgot something fundamental. Money systems are not machines. They are human ecosystems. Fear moves them. Pride distorts them. Politics infects them. And when leaders worship a system instead of questioning it, adaptation disappears. Marcus Aurelius quietly warned about this kind of rigidity. He urged rulers to examine their judgments constantly, because what destroys men is not chaos. It is certainty without reflection. And the central bankers of that era were certain. Certain the gold standard was eternal. Certain discipline would maintain order. Certain they understood the forces they were managing. But systems built on rigid belief have a weakness. They cannot bend. And when pressure rises, they do not adjust. They break. The quiet truth you must understand is this: financial collapse rarely begins with corruption. It begins with something more subtle. Brilliant people who refuse to doubt their own framework. And the four men at the center of global finance were about to face a world their system was never designed to survive. War, debt, revenge, and human pride. The storm was already forming. Most people simply couldn't see it yet, because the system still looked stable. Chapter 3. The War That Shattered the Financial Illusion. Let me ask you something you rarely hear in economic discussions. Have you noticed how the biggest financial disasters rarely begin with money? They begin with something else. Pride, fear, power. Then money simply becomes the battlefield. In 1914, the world looked economically connected like never before. Trade routes stretched across oceans. Banks financed railroads, industries, and empires. The gold standard sat at the center like a silent referee. But then something happened that financial systems rarely survive. War. World War I did not just destroy cities. It destroyed the rules that money depended on. Governments suddenly needed unimaginable amounts of cash. Armies had to be fed. Weapons had to be built. Industries had to run without pause. Gold alone could not fund that scale of destruction. So governments did something dangerous. They abandoned discipline. They printed money. They borrowed heavily. They suspended the gold standard. And for the first time in decades, finance stopped behaving like a stable system. It became a tool of survival. Now here's the psychological twist. During crisis, humans justify actions they would normally reject. The philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries earlier. He observed that leaders often break their own rules when survival is threatened. Not because they want to, but because circumstances force them. During the war, governments borrowed enormous sums, especially from the United States. By the end of the conflict, the financial map of the world had changed completely. Europe was drowning in debt. America had become the largest creditor on Earth. And Germany, defeated and humiliated, faced crushing reparations. On paper, these debts looked manageable. But that was an illusion, because debts between nations are rarely just economic. They become psychological weapons. Resentment grows, blame spreads, and every country begins protecting its own interests. This might sound uncomfortable, but economic revenge is a real force in history. John Maynard Keynes warned about this in 1919 after the Treaty of Versailles. He argued that punishing Germany financially would destabilize Europe. Not morally, but mathematically, because a nation crushed by debt eventually stops cooperating. Keynes saw the danger clearly, but political pride ignored the warning. And here is the deeper psychological trap. When people suffer after war, they want justice. But justice often turns into punishment disguised as fairness. Germany owed massive reparations. France demanded payment. Britain owed debts to America. America expected repayment. Money began moving in circles across the world. Loans from America paid German reparations. German reparations paid European debts. European debts repaid American banks. On the surface, the system appeared balanced. But in reality, it was fragile, like a tower made from borrowed bricks. The central bankers knew something was wrong, but they believed they could manage it. Adjust interest rates, control gold flows, stabilize currencies. They trusted the system. But here is a lesson you should never ignore. A system built on political resentment and financial pressure cannot remain stable for long. Seneca once said that anger and desperation make terrible architects. And the post-war financial order was built on both. The war had ended, but the economic battlefield had just begun. And the four central bankers were now responsible for holding together a world that was quietly coming apart. Chapter 4. The dangerous confidence of the men who thought they could fix the world. Let me ask you something quietly uncomfortable. Have you ever watched someone brilliant, someone respected, slowly become dangerous because they stopped questioning themselves? It happens more often than we admit, not through evil, but through certainty. After World War I, the global financial system looked broken but not dead. Currencies were unstable. Debt chains tangled nations together. Yet the leaders of central banking believed something bold. They believed they could restore the old order. For men stood at the center of that belief. They rarely appeared in newspapers. They gave few speeches. But they controlled the most powerful levers in finance. Interest rates, gold flows, currency stability. Liaquat Ahamed described them not as villains, but as men carrying the quiet confidence of surgeons. They believed the patient, the global economy, could be repaired. One of them, the governor of the Bank of England, treated finance almost like a sacred craft. Quiet, private, elite. He believed stability required discipline above all else. Another, the leader of America's most powerful central bank branch, believed markets could be carefully guided. He was calm, strategic. He thought subtle adjustments could prevent chaos. And for a while, it looked like he was right. Interest rates moved. Currencies stabilized. Trade slowly returned. But here's the deeper psychological trap. When leaders solve one crisis successfully, their confidence multiplies. Psychologist Albert Bandura discovered in 1977 that success strengthens self-efficacy, the belief that one's decisions will produce the desired outcome. Normally, this is healthy, but in positions of immense power, it becomes dangerous, because the brain quietly rewrites the story. Instead of saying, "We solved a problem," it begins saying, "I control the system." Sun Tzu warned about this kind of overconfidence. He said that a commander who wins repeatedly begins to believe victory is guaranteed, and that belief blinds him to new threats. Finance in the 1920s looked like a recovery story. Markets rose, currencies stabilized, credit expanded. People started believing the worst had passed. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle was happening. Central banks were quietly manipulating money flows to keep the fragile system alive. Interest rates in one country had to adjust to protect another. Gold shipments moved like emergency medicine across borders. The system survived, but only because constant intervention kept it breathing. This might sound impressive, but here is the truth. A system that survives only through continuous intervention is not stable. It is artificially alive. Marcus Aurelius once urged leaders to remember something simple. You do not control events. You only influence them for a moment. The central bankers of the 1920s slowly forgot this. They believed they could engineer balance. They believed their expertise had tamed economic chaos. But the more control they exercised, the more the system depended on their judgment. And that dependence created a hidden danger. Because when a system relies on a few minds at the top, their mistakes do not remain personal. Their mistakes become global consequences. The four bankers were respected, feared even, but none of them fully understood the storm forming beneath the surface. Credit bubbles, speculative markets, fragile debt structures. The system looked stable, but stability built on constant manipulation is not strength. It is tension, and tension, if ignored long enough, does only one thing: it snaps. Chapter 5. The Seduction of Easy Money. Why you fall for the boom before the fall. Let me ask you something honestly. When things start going well in your life, money flowing, opportunities rising, do you ever pause and ask, is this growth real or just momentum? Most people don't, because prosperity is intoxicating. In the 1920s, the world entered a decade that felt like a rebirth. Factories roared back to life. New technologies appeared everywhere. Cars, radios, electricity spreading across cities. Markets surged. America especially looked unstoppable. Stocks climbed higher each year. People who had never invested before suddenly entered the market. Clerks, teachers, shopkeepers, everyone wanted a piece of prosperity. But here's where the story takes a darker psychological turn. The boom was not driven only by productivity. It was fueled by cheap credit. Money became easier to borrow. Banks lent freely. Investors bought stocks not just with savings, but with borrowed money. This practice was called buying on margin. Simple concept. You invest $10, borrow 90, control 100. If the stock rises, profits explode. But if it falls, everything collapses instantly. This might sound reckless, but during booms, recklessness looks like genius. Robert Shiller later studied financial bubbles and showed that markets often rise because of narrative contagion. Stories spread faster than facts. People hear about neighbors getting rich. They hear about unstoppable industries. Soon a collective belief forms. This time is different. And once that sentence appears in the public mind, discipline disappears. Nietzsche once observed that humans do not fear illusions when those illusions make them feel powerful. Markets work the same way. During the 1920s, the stock market became more than an investment platform. It became a symbol of modern progress. Newspapers celebrated rising prices. Speculators became admired figures. Even respected economists began defending the boom. One famous economist publicly claimed that stock prices had reached a permanently high plateau. This might sound naive today, but at the time it sounded reasonable, because the boom had lasted so long. Psychologist Charles Mackay described this behavior in his work on mass delusions in the 19th century. He discovered that when large groups chase wealth simultaneously, rational judgment fades. People stop asking if something makes sense. They ask only one question: am I missing out? That fear has a name today: FOMO, fear of missing out. And during the 1920s, it infected entire societies. Even some central bankers felt uneasy. They could see speculation growing. They debated raising interest rates to slow the market, but doing so risked damaging economic recovery. So they hesitated. This might sound like responsible caution, but sometimes hesitation allows danger to mature. Marcus Aurelius once warned that what appears pleasant in the moment can carry consequences hidden in the future. The stock boom of the 1920s looked like prosperity, but beneath the excitement lived something fragile. A financial structure held up by borrowed money, and systems built on leverage behave like towers made of glass. They rise quickly, they sparkle under sunlight, but once pressure arrives, they don't bend, they shatter. And by the end of the decade, pressure was already building. Quietly, patiently, waiting for one small push. The video is half finished. If you like the video, be sure to comment and watch the next steps. Chapter 6. The day confidence died. When the crowd realized the game was rigged by reality. Let me ask you something you rarely admit to yourself. Have you ever watched something collapse and suddenly realized the warning signs were always there? Not hidden, just ignored. That is exactly what happened in 1929. For years, the market climbed like a staircase to the sky. New highs, new fortunes. People spoke about wealth as if it were permanent. But markets are not emotional creatures. They are mirrors. They reflect collective psychology. And when belief breaks, the mirror shatters. The tension began quietly. Some investors started selling. Nothing dramatic, just small movements. But markets built on borrowed money behave like dry forests. One spark becomes wildfire. By October 1929, the selling accelerated. Prices dropped. Investors who bought on margin suddenly faced a brutal reality. Banks demanded repayment. Immediately, they had no choice but to sell. And when everyone sells at once, prices collapse. This might sound mechanical, but what really died that week was confidence. Psychologist Gustave Le Bon studied crowd behavior in 1895 and discovered something unsettling. Individuals inside crowds do not think like individuals. Emotion spreads faster than reason. Fear becomes contagious. The market crash behaved exactly like that. Panic spread across trading floors. Phones rang endlessly. Orders flooded the system. People who felt rich days earlier suddenly realized their wealth was fragile. Some fortunes disappeared in hours. This might sound exaggerated, but leveraged markets turn small declines into financial earthquakes. A drop of 10% can destroy investors who borrowed heavily. And once liquidation begins, it feeds itself. More selling, more fear, more collapse. The philosopher Seneca warned about this centuries ago. He wrote that prosperity reveals itself slowly, but disaster arrives all at once. During the crash, governments tried calming the public. Bankers gave reassuring speeches. Newspapers urged patience. But something deeper had already shifted. Trust. Once trust cracks inside a financial system, logic stops working. Because money itself is not physical wealth. It is confidence stored in numbers. Economist Hyman Minsky later explained this pattern clearly. He discovered that long periods of stability lead people to take greater risks. Eventually, the system becomes dependent on constant growth. Once growth slows, the structure collapses under its own weight. The crash of 1929 was not just a market event. It was a psychological rupture. For years, people believed prosperity was unstoppable. In a single week, that belief died. And when belief dies in finance, the damage spreads far beyond markets. Businesses fail. Banks collapse. Jobs disappear. The crash was only the first crack. The real catastrophe was still approaching, because the financial system now faced something far more dangerous than falling prices. Fear turning into economic paralysis. Chapter 7. When fear freezes the world, how panic quietly turns into depression. Let me ask you something personal. When things go wrong in your life, really wrong, do you fight harder, or do you slowly stop moving? That second reaction is more dangerous, because collapse rarely happens in a single moment. It spreads like psychological paralysis. After the crash of 1929, many people believed the crisis would pass quickly. Markets fall. Markets recover. That was the usual rhythm. But something different happened this time. Instead of bouncing back, the economy began freezing. Banks stopped trusting borrowers. Businesses stopped investing. Families stopped spending. And once spending stops, the entire economic engine begins choking. This might sound simple, but the psychology behind it is brutal. Economist John Maynard Keynes explained this through something he called animal spirits. Not literal instincts, but the emotional energy that drives economic activity. Confidence pushes people to invest, build, hire. Fear does the opposite. It makes people hold everything back. And in the early 1930s, fear dominated every decision. Banks began failing, thousands of them. When one bank collapsed, depositors rushed to withdraw their money from others. This created bank runs. Perfectly healthy banks could collapse simply because people panicked. This might sound irrational, but psychology explains it clearly. Studies on loss aversion by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in 1979 discovered something crucial. Humans fear losses twice as strongly as they value gains. So when uncertainty appears, the mind does something primal. It retreats, save money, cancel risks, wait for safety. But when millions of people make that same decision simultaneously, the economy suffocates, factories close, unemployment spreads, trade collapses. By 1933, nearly 1/4 of the American workforce had no job. Not because people stopped needing goods, but because the system itself had stalled. And here is where the deeper mistake of the central bankers appeared. Instead of loosening money to encourage recovery, many governments did the opposite. They tightened discipline to defend the gold standard. Interest rates stayed high. Money supply shrank. This might sound responsible, but in a collapsing economy, strict discipline becomes poison. Sun Tzu once warned that rigid strategies fail in changing conditions. Commander must adapt to the terrain, but financial leaders remained loyal to the old rules. Gold above flexibility, stability above relief. And this decision deepened the crisis. The philosopher Zeno, founder of Stoicism, believed wisdom meant understanding what can and cannot be controlled. But these leaders tried controlling the wrong thing. They defended currency values, while the real crisis was human survival. Shops closed, families lost homes, entire industries disappeared, and the world entered a period history would later call the Great Depression. But here is the uncomfortable lesson. The Depression was not only an economic failure. It was a failure of imagination. Leaders could not imagine abandoning the system they trusted, even when that system was destroying the world around them. And when leaders cannot imagine alternatives, history becomes merciless, because suffering continues until someone finally dares to change the rules. Chapter 8. The Tyranny of Bad Ideas. When loyalty to a system becomes a form of blindness. Let me ask you something that may sting a little. Have you ever defended an idea, even when reality kept proving it wrong? Not because you were stupid, but because abandoning it meant admitting. You built your life on a fragile belief. That is exactly what happened during the worst years of the Great Depression. By the early 1930s, the evidence was everywhere. Factories silent, banks collapsing, millions unemployed. Yet many financial leaders still defended the same doctrine. The gold standard. To them, gold was discipline. Gold was credibility. Gold was civilization itself. Abandoning it felt like surrender. But here is the dangerous psychological mechanism behind this stubbornness. Psychologist Leon Festinger discovered in 1957 something called cognitive dissonance. When reality contradicts a deeply held belief, the mind feels discomfort. And instead of changing the belief, people often reinterpret reality. They double down. Central bankers insisted the Depression required more discipline, less spending, higher taxes, balanced budgets. In theory, this preserved long-term stability, but in practice it deepened the suffering. This might sound cruel, but bad ideas rarely collapse quickly. They survive because intelligent people defend them. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that convictions can become prisons. Once a belief becomes sacred, questioning it feels like betrayal. And the gold standard had become sacred. Nations feared leaving it. They believed abandoning gold would destroy trust in their currency. But something ironic was happening. Trust was already collapsing. People were not losing faith in gold. They were losing faith in the system protecting it. Economist Barry Eichengreen later studied this period and discovered something remarkable. Countries that abandoned the gold standard earlier recovered faster. Those that clung to it suffered longer. This might sound obvious today, but at the time it felt radical. Imagine telling the financial guardians of the world that the rule they protected for decades was now causing the crisis. That takes courage. Marcus Aurelius once advised leaders to remain flexible in judgment. He urged them to follow truth even when it contradicts tradition. But traditions are powerful, especially when they define entire careers. So the system kept grinding forward. Governments tightened spending. Central banks defended gold reserves. And ordinary people paid the price. Homes lost, savings erased, families shattered. This might sound harsh, but history rarely protects those who suffer quietly. Eventually pressure builds. Public anger grows. Political movements rise. Because when economic pain lasts too long, people stop trusting institutions. They start searching for new leaders, new ideologies, sometimes dangerous ones. And by the early 1930s, that shift had already begun. The financial crisis was no longer just about money. It was becoming something far more volatile, a crisis of political stability itself. And once politics enters the economic battlefield, the game changes completely. Chapter 9. When broken economies create dangerous leaders, the shadow of desperation. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What happens to a society when millions of people lose not only money, but dignity? Not just jobs, not just savings, but the quiet belief that tomorrow will be better. Because when that belief dies, something darker appears. During the deepest years of the Great Depression, economic collapse did not stay inside banks and factories. It entered politics. Unemployment spread across nations. Entire industries collapsed. Farmers lost land. Workers lost homes. And people began searching for someone to blame. This might sound predictable, but the psychology behind it is dangerous. Psychologist Henri Tajfel discovered in 1971 through social identity theory that when people experience collective hardship, they begin dividing the world into groups. Us and them. Blame becomes easier than complexity. The economic system had failed, but the public rarely sees systems. They see faces, bankers, politicians, foreign countries, and in times of suffering, strong voices rise. Voices promising order, control, national pride. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes once argued that when societies feel threatened, people become willing to trade freedom for stability. Not because they desire tyranny, but because chaos feels worse. During the early 1930s, that psychological shift spread across several countries. Desperation created fertile ground for radical ideologies. Some promised strict national control over the economy. Others promised revenge against enemies, real or imagined. Economic humiliation turned into political anger. This might sound like a moral story, but it is actually a structural one. Economic collapse weakens democratic institutions. People begin believing slow systems cannot solve urgent problems. They start looking for decisive leaders. Leaders who speak with certainty, even when that certainty is dangerous. Sun Tzu wrote that when an army loses morale, discipline alone cannot restore it. It must regain belief in victory. Societies behave the same way. Without hope, people become vulnerable to extreme solutions. And here is the bitter irony. The financial collapse that began with central banking mistakes eventually reshaped entire political landscapes. New movements rose. New powers emerged. The world order that existed before the crash began dissolving. This might sound dramatic, but economic suffering changes history faster than ideology alone ever could. Liaquat Ahemed's deeper point in telling this story was not simply to blame individuals. It was to show something unsettling. Small decisions made in quiet offices can eventually reshape the fate of entire nations. Interest rates, currency policies, debt negotiations. These technical choices may appear harmless, but when they interact with human psychology, they create consequences no model can fully predict. The Great Depression was not just a financial crisis. It became a civilizational turning point, because once people lose trust in the institutions meant to protect them, they start rewriting the rules of power itself. And by the mid-1930s, the old financial order had already begun collapsing. The world now faced a brutal realization. The system that once promised stability had not only failed, it had helped create a far more dangerous era. One shaped not by bankers, but by forces far harder to control: fear, anger, and the hunger for power. Chapter 10. The lesson you were never meant to ignore: power, pride, and the cost of certainty. Let me ask you the final question. After hearing this story, after watching the rise, the boom, the collapse, what do you think actually broke the world? Was it greed? Speculation? Banks? Those played their part. But the deeper cause is more unsettling. It was human certainty, the quiet belief among powerful people that they understood a system too complex to fully control. Liaquat Ahemed's story of the central bankers is not simply history. It is a warning, for intelligent men stood at the center of global finance. They believed discipline would protect stability. They believed gold would guarantee order. They believed their judgment could guide the system through crisis. But history exposed something ancient about power. When leaders become guardians of a system, they slowly begin defending the system even when reality changes. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said something brutally honest about control. He said the first step toward wisdom is recognizing what is not in your power. Yet financial systems tempt leaders to believe the opposite. Interest rates move, markets respond, currencies stabilize. It feels like control, but it is often temporary influence mistaken for mastery. The Great Depression revealed that economic systems are not machines. They are living networks of psychology. Fear spreads faster than policy. Confidence dies faster than institutions can repair it. Economist Milton Friedman later studied the crisis and found that monetary contraction deepened the depression dramatically. But the tragedy was not just technical. It was human. The people responsible were not villains. They were disciplined men, respected men, but their loyalty to old rules prevented them from seeing a new reality. And this is where the deeper lesson lives. Civilizations rarely collapse because people intend harm. They collapse because intelligent people become trapped inside their own frameworks. Marcus Aurelius once urged himself to question every assumption. Not occasionally, constantly, because the moment a belief becomes unquestionable, it becomes dangerous. You see the same pattern everywhere today. Markets rising endlessly, experts speaking with confidence, systems praised as permanent, but history whispers something different. Every financial order eventually faces stress. Every economic doctrine eventually meets reality. And when that moment comes, survival depends on one ability above all: adaptation. Not pride, not rigid loyalty, adaptation. The central bankers of the early 20th century believed they were protecting stability. Instead, their certainty helped produce the greatest economic collapse in modern history. This might sound harsh, but history rarely punishes ignorance. It punishes unquestioned belief held by powerful people. And that is the final truth of this story. Money is never just numbers. It is belief. And belief, when guided by wisdom, builds civilizations. But belief guided by pride can quietly break the world. Thank you very much for watching my video, and please like and subscribe to my channel.